What happens when a growing community starts to crack from within? Can something small, like a complaint, threaten something big? And how do you solve a problem without losing your purpose? As the early church continued to grow, something remarkable was happening. More people were joining, more lives were being changed. The message was spreading, and the sense of unity was strong. But growth always brings complexity. And in the middle of that growth, a tension began to rise. It didn't start with conflict or confrontation. It started quietly with a complaint. Some of the Greek-speaking believers began to feel overlooked. Specifically, their widows were not receiving the same daily support as others. At first glance, this might seem like a small issue, a logistical problem, something that could be easily fixed. But beneath the surface, it carried something deeper. It touched on fairness, on inclusion, on whether every person truly mattered. Because when people feel unseen, it doesn't just affect their situation, it affects their sense of belonging. And if left unaddressed, even small concerns can grow into division. The early church stood at a critical moment. They could ignore the issue and hope it would pass. They could respond defensively and create more tension. Or they could face it directly, with wisdom. The apostles chose the third path. They gathered the community together, not just the leaders, not just a few voices, everyone. And they acknowledged the problem. They didn't dismiss it. They didn't minimize it. They recognized that something needed to change. But they also understood something important. They had a specific role to fulfill. Their calling was to focus on prayer and teaching, not because serving others wasn't important, but because their role required full attention. If they tried to do everything, they would lose focus on what they were meant to do best. And that's a challenge many people face, trying to carry too much, trying to be everything for everyone, and in the process losing clarity. The apostles didn't fall into that trap. Instead, they made a decision that would strengthen the entire community. They invited the people to choose 7 men from among them, not just anyone. Men known for good character, full of wisdom, grounded in faith. These were not just helpers, they were leaders in their own right, trusted, respected, capable. The responsibility given to them was clear, to oversee the daily distribution and ensure that no one was overlooked. This was more than delegation. It was empowerment. It was the recognition that leadership is not about control, it's about trust. By sharing responsibility, the apostles created space for others to step forward. And something powerful happened. The problem that could have divided them became an opportunity to strengthen them. The 7 chosen stepped into their roles with purpose. They brought structure to the situation. They brought care to those who felt forgotten. They restored balance where there had been tension. And in doing so, they protected the unity of the community. Meanwhile, the apostles remained focused on prayer and teaching, not distracted, not overwhelmed, aligned with their calling. And the result? The message continued to spread. The number of believers grew. Even some who had once been resistant began to listen. That outcome is important, because it shows that when a community handles challenges well, it doesn't just survive, it grows. This story offers a powerful lesson about leadership. Leadership is not about doing everything. It is about knowing what matters most and making space for others to contribute. It is about recognizing that every role has value, that service is not lesser, it is essential, and that the strength of a community is found in how well it works together. There is also a deeper message about listening. The complaint that started this situation was not ignored. It was heard, taken seriously, addressed with intention, and that response made all the difference. Because when people feel heard, trust grows. When trust grows, unity strengthens. And when unity strengthens, the entire community becomes more resilient. In today's world, this principle still applies. Whether in families, teams, or communities, issues will arise. Misunderstandings will happen, needs will be overlooked, but the response determines the outcome. Ignoring problems creates distance, defensiveness creates conflict, but listening creates connection. The early church chose connection. They leaned into the discomfort instead of avoiding it, and by doing so they turned a potential division into a moment of growth. There is also something meaningful about the qualities required for the 7. They were not chosen based on status or skill alone. They were chosen for their character, for their integrity, for their ability to lead with wisdom and care. This reminds us that what we do is important, but who we are matters more. Because roles can change, tasks can shift, but character remains the foundation. And when that foundation is strong, everything built on it becomes stronger. The act of serving tables might seem simple, but in this context it was significant. It was about ensuring fairness, about honoring dignity, about meeting real needs. And that kind of service carries weight, because behind every task is a person, a story, a need. And when we serve with that awareness, even the smallest actions become meaningful. The 7 men didn't just solve a problem, they created a system that cared, a structure that supported, a rhythm that allowed the community to function with greater harmony, and that harmony made space for continued growth. This story also highlights something important about calling. Not everyone is meant to do the same thing. Different roles exist for a reason. Some are called to lead publicly. Others are called to serve behind the scenes. Some are called to speak. Others are called to organize. And every role matters, because without balance, the whole system struggles. The apostles understood this. They didn't try to elevate one role above another. They recognized the value in each. And by doing so, they created a culture where contribution was honored, not compared, not ranked, but respected. This is a powerful shift in perspective, because in many environments today, value is often measured by visibility. But this story reminds us that impact is not always visible. Sometimes the most important work happens quietly, consistently, faithfully, and that work creates the foundation for everything else. The choosing of the 7 also reflects trust in the community. The apostles didn't control the decision. They invited the people to participate, to take ownership, to be part of the solution. And that involvement strengthened the bond between them. Because when people are trusted, they rise. When they are included, they engage. And when they engage, they contribute more fully. This creates a cycle of growth, where responsibility is shared, where leadership is multiplied, where the burden is not carried by a few, but supported by many. And that kind of structure is sustainable. It allows for expansion without collapse. It allows for growth without losing direction. It allows for challenges to be addressed without breaking unity. As we reflect on this story, it invites us to look at our own lives. Where are we trying to do too much? Where are we holding on to control instead of trusting others? Where are we overlooking needs because we are focused elsewhere? And how can we respond differently? Because sometimes the solution is not doing more. It is doing differently. It is stepping back to see clearly. It is creating space for others. It is recognizing that we are not meant to carry everything alone. There is also a personal invitation here to consider how we serve, not just what we do, but how we do it. Do we serve with attention, with care, with awareness of the people behind the tasks? Because service is not just action, it is attitude. And when that attitude is rooted in compassion, it changes everything. The story of the 7 is not dramatic in the way some others are. There are no miracles in the streets, no prison doors opening, no sudden transformations. But it is powerful in a different way. It shows the strength of structure, the importance of wisdom, the value of unity, and the impact of simple, faithful service. Sometimes the most meaningful change happens not through extraordinary moments, but through thoughtful decisions, through intentional leadership, through consistent care. And that is what we see here. A community that chose to address a problem with clarity, a leadership that chose to share responsibility, a group of individuals who stepped forward to serve, and the result was growth. Not just in numbers, but in strength, in unity, in purpose. This story reminds us that challenges are not always obstacles. Sometimes they are opportunities, opportunities to improve, to grow, to become better. But only if we are willing to respond with wisdom, with humility, with openness. Because the way we handle small issues often determines how we face bigger ones. And when we learn to respond well in the small moments, we build the capacity to handle more. The early church didn't avoid difficulty. They faced it, they adapted, they grew through it. And in doing so, they created a model that continues to speak today. A model of leadership that empowers. A model of service that values every role. A model of community that listens and responds. And perhaps that is the invitation for us, to build environments where people feel seen, where needs are addressed, where roles are respected, where unity is protected. Because when those elements are present, something powerful happens. People thrive, communities grow, and purpose becomes clear. Thank you for watching this video. If this message inspired you, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who values growth, unity, and meaningful leadership.